Hello, everybody. Welcome to day number 62 of my self-connection experiment where I meditate every day for 2 hours and then share my experiences in a daily video with you guys. And wow, I've been really shaken up lately. One way to think of it is as our awareness rises, as our consciousness rises, we become like, say we have all this darkness, right? Say this is all of our darkness, all of our unintegrated aspects, all of our unconsciousness, our karma, however you want to look at it. As our consciousness rises, we become aware of more and more of it, right? And at different levels of it. And so that's what I've been really experiencing is the higher my consciousness goes, the more I can see aspects of myself that are an unconscious identification with like a self or the illusionary like type of psychological construct we create for ourselves. And it's that identity I'm seeing that creates my patterns of suffering, my patterns of lack, and all my patterns of self-doubt and needing validation from others, right? So as my consciousness is rising through these meditations, I'm more able to see these aspects of me clearly. And this is two things. This is why when you first awaken, can be so harrowing and so intense and overwhelming. It's because, if your consciousness is like right here, and even if you have all this darkness, unintegrated darkness, if your consciousness is right here, you're only aware of a little bit of it, right? But when we go through a kundalini awakening or a massive spiritual awakening, all of a sudden our consciousness jumps, makes a huge leap, and now we see all of this darkness that we've been trying to suppress or hide or run from in a myriad of ways. And like when you have this level of consciousness and you're only seeing a little bit of darkness, you can distract yourself from it. You can avoid it, you can suppress it, you can project it onto others unknowingly. And all of these type of escape mechanisms, however you want to look at it, they can work. But it's like when we get that sudden jump of consciousness and now we have all this new awareness, all that darkness, all of that unintegrated unconsciousness, all that repressed fear and trauma and pain and darkness, it's inescapable, right? It's just overwhelmingly in front of our face 24/7. And that's why a spiritual awakening at first can really turn into a healing crisis, because now we are aware of all this unconsciousness, but we haven't yet cultivated the tools or discovered how to integrate all of it. And that can lead us on a different type of trail where we find certain things and we have this really intense seeking energy because we want to understand what's happening, right? But that movement, it doesn't change the deeper we awaken. In my own experience, the raising of consciousness keeps showing us more of our darkness and more of our darkness that we can't escape. But we have an appreciation for the process because we understand the movement of healing and we know what's happening. We know we're just integrating all of these false aspects of ourselves, integrating all of these repressed and suppressed aspects of ourselves. And so what can happen is you reach a certain level of consciousness. Like you thought you have an identity of who you are, like say like right here. And then you start doing the inner work, you start, meditating, whatever it is for you, or you're just living life. Living life is a great way to awaken. And you come to like right here. Well, now this older self that you identified with, it can't exist at this level of consciousness. So you have to let go of it. You have to let go of it to create the space for a new crystallization of self to arrive at this level. And so when we do that, that's really what I feel an ego death is. It's like you just reached a new level of consciousness where the old self you were identified with can't survive at the new level of consciousness. And when we're in the middle of that transition, and I've gone through this, it feels like 4 or 5 times on this 62-day journey I'm on. When we're in this transition, it can be really frightening for the mind because the mind doesn't have anywhere to kind of plug into for an identity for a little bit. Because it's seeing what it's not. It finally sees what it's not, and it sees the illusions of what it thought it was, and it sees how that can't be me. But it doesn't yet have a firm and stable and steady place to stand. So we can really, for a little bit, feel like we're kind of floating through the ethers. We start having this knowing that we don't exist inside of a body, but that the body exists inside of what we are. And we don't exist inside of our mind, but the mind exists inside of what we are. And then we start having this, we come to this place where I was feeling last night and this morning. Right now I'm feeling much more grounded. But I was feeling this place of no identity at all. And I felt like, whoa, who am I? I was really asking this question over and over again. Who am I? You know, if I'm not those old things I was attached to, those old beliefs, ideas of who I was, that old psychological construct that's falling away because a new level of awareness has been reached. Well, then who am I? And the movement I came into seeing was, okay, so the awareness was here, it went to here, right? And then this old self had to fall away. But because it went to here, now all of this darkness must be seen and integrated. And initially, what this can feel like, I'm going to try to put this in words the best I can. What this can feel like when we make that leap, but we have all this darkness to integrate, it can make the mind feel crazy, right? Because now there's so much more to integrate, but the mind doesn't have the same place to integrate from. The mind has to integrate from a new place that it doesn't have an identity cultivated in yet. It doesn't have a stable ground. It's not on 2 feet yet, right? It's in the transition of getting there and really rooting in. But while it's getting there and rooting in, all this darkness surfaces, and it can make the mind feel like it's gonna go crazy. And if we identify with the mind and the craziness in the mind as this transition is happening, that can be a trip. That can be a trip. And this is the fierce grace of this process. While we're in that transition, the fierce grace is trying to teach us to let go of identification with the mind. To let the mind have its craziness, to let the mind just have thought storms, have crazy, intrusive, dark thoughts, have whatever movement it needs to have, while we stay as the space of awareness. While we stay as what's been coming to me is the space in which it all happens, right? Because we don't exist in the mind. And if we falsely think we exist in the mind and through the mind, then it's going to be easy to get identified with the craziness that's happening, with the darkness that's happening as you're raising your consciousness and the integration process is happening. All that darkness needs to be integrated to come, you have to integrate the light and the dark. But if we can know ourselves as the space in which the mind exists, then what happens is we can see that it's just a machine. It's just has its programs. We can see the mind's innocence. We can see that it's not us, and we can just see that it's scared and it's throwing a little bit of a tantrum because it's a survival machine at its core. And then we can parent the mind through this process. We can soothe the mind. We can tell the mind it's okay. You're gonna feel safe again. This will integrate and this shall pass. And what I was doing in my meditation this morning, as my mind was really freaking out because of all this new awareness and all the darkness coming up to be integrated, and the mind's lack of ability to grab on, to like an identity and attach to all these old constructs and beliefs that it once knew itself to be, I was sending my mind so much love and just saying to the mind, it's okay, you can have your movement, think your crazy thoughts, I'm here for you, I'm here to love you, I'm here to support you through this, And I found that this was so helpful. It really brought in a calming presence to the process. And I'm not saying the craziness, the crazy thoughts like instantly vanished, but what I did feel was this deep sense of peace, tranquility, and serenity underneath the craziness. And this helped the mind to integrate into this place of peace and love. And because ultimately that's where the higher consciousness is taking us. It's taking us to root into love and to peace and to divine will, and allowing this darkness up. This darkness is our power, and that's what happens. Initially our consciousness rises, and we have to let go of this old self. And because we do that, we can feel very insecure and unsure, because we're now in the unknown again. We're in a new place without an identity. And that's scary, but especially for the mind. But here's what happens. You rise up, you see this darkness that needs to be integrated, and you let the darkness up, and guess what? The darkness roots you into your power. That's why it's a beautiful yin and yang process. Or yang, and yin, however you want to look at it, however it resonates for you, light and dark. You need both. And that's what this darkness is here to do when your consciousness rises. If you'll let it up, if you'll see it, if you'll accept it, if you'll let it make the mind kind of spin out into craziness, if you'll just let the process happen, as messy and uncontrollable and painful and at times scary as it can be, if you will embrace this darkness, it really roots you into your center, your centeredness. The darkness helps you to break identification with the mind, and it helps to show you, if nothing else, as the consciousness gets really high and we see this really intense darkness come up, if nothing else, it shows you that you cannot do this alone. These last 2 days, more than ever in this whole awakening process, I finally, in a deep way, realized I cannot do this. I can't do this path. God has to do it for me. The intelligence of life has to do it for me. The universe has to do it for me. My higher self has to do it for me. And so these last 2 days, I've really, and like I've been saying in a deeper way, just been saying, take my life, God. I've been saying, higher self, just do this, because I can't do this myself. And when I say I mean the thinking mind. I've really discovered how powerless and how limited and how the thinking mind is not going to be able, just can't do this path. It just can't. The thinking mind must be repurposed as an assistant for God, for the divine, for the universe to do this through you. It must be repurposed as an assistant for your higher self. And that's what this darkness helps us to do. It helps us to let go of trying to do this path. And it helps us to just give it over to the divine. It helps us to break identification with, thought, with the psychological constructs we create. And the other thing this darkness does is it helps us come into our heart more fully. Because there is no better time to come into your heart than when you are facing something that scares you, than when you are reaching a level of consciousness that is truly scaring you. There is no better thing to do than to come into your heart and to open yourself to grace, to open yourself to God. These are the movements. Whenever we find ourselves in over our head with too much darkness, too much consciousness, we can't integrate it all. We're feeling like we're going crazy. We're having all kinds of symptoms. We're not functioning well. We've lost the identity of who we are, and we don't even know where we're going. When we feel in these places, which happen on the spiritual path, it's part of this process. When we find ourselves in these places, the two movements, there's no better time than for the two movements of coming into your heart, knowing yourself as love, and connecting with Source, with God, with the divine, and surrendering your life and your egoic desires to God, to the universe. Because when you do that, that's when you start to feel the safety that's always within you. When you start to really come into your heart, that's when you start knowing yourself as love. And when you know yourself as love, then all of this alchemization, all of this inner work, there becomes this underlying harmony to it, this underlying safe feeling. You start to hear this voice within you that tells you everything is going to be okay. And the more you can come into your heart, the more clearly you can hear this voice, and the more safe you feel through it all, and the less you identify with the mind. Because the more you're in the heart, the less you're going to be pulled by the mind. And I'm going to leave you with this. The heart isn't persuasive. The heart doesn't try to, like, the mind is very cunning and tricky and clever. And it's very persuasive, and it can really say, bring you up into the thought space. But the heart is none of those things. It's just always there. The heart says, I'm always here if you need me. The heart is always available for you to go into, for you to feel into, and for you to know your goodness, for you to know your innocence. And when we're connected to the heart, then we have a much more vast pathway to the divine. And it's those movements, opening and going deep into the heart and connecting to the divine, that really pull us through the challenging times of an ego death, of losing our identity, of being overwhelmed by darkness. So, yeah, fun times. Wow, can you believe this, everything that's happening right now on planet Earth, all this energy, all this transformation. It's what a magical ride, right? And I know it's not always easy. I'm right there with you guys. But if we can just really learn to open ourselves to the divine and to surrender our lives to something greater, then this path becomes a whole lot easier and much easier to understand as well. So I love you all so much. Day 62. I will see you tomorrow. Namaste.